Play it, and name your price. No one has dared touch that piano in 3 years. Marisol Thorne had cleaned floors at Leandro Falco's estate for 9 days when she crossed a silent ballroom and sat down at the sealed piano of the most feared man on Lake Solora. Every winter, Leandro Falco opened his estate for a single night and let the city inside. Politicians who feared him in daylight drank his wine. Women in furs admired his gardens. And every winter, at some point in the evening, someone would ask about the locked room at the end of the West Gallery, and the question would travel back to him like a stone dropped in still water. Inside that room stood a piano that had not made a sound in 3 years. It had belonged to his sister. Since her death, he had sealed the room, and each winter he made the same offer to the finest players in the country. Restore the instrument. Make it sing again. Name the price. Not one of them had accepted. Some said the piano was ruined, its soundboard cracked, one pedal broken, 3 keys gone silent. Others said the truth more quietly. They were afraid of the man who owned it, and afraid of what it might mean to fail in his house. Marisol Thorne knew none of this in her first week of work. She knew only that she had been hired 9 days earlier to carry trays, polish silver, and stay invisible. She was failing at the last part. Careful girl. A woman in pale silver stepped aside as Marisol passed with a tray of glasses. Ravenna Voss had the kind of beauty that made rooms rearrange themselves, and the kind of smile that warmed only when someone else was about to be cold. They let anyone serve these days. Marisol lowered her eyes and kept moving. Her hands had begun to shake, which was how the trouble always started. When people watched her waiting, her fingers forgot how to be fingers. She had spent 12 years married to a man who narrated her every mistake before she made it, and some part of her still heard him. You break things, Marisol. Vaughn used to say, and then you look surprised that they are broken. The tray tilted, a single glass slid, and then, as if the others wished to follow, the whole silver surface pitched forward. Crystal struck marble. The sound cut through the orchestra, like a scream. 200 faces turned. Ravenna laughed, soft and delighted. There it is, she murmured to the woman beside her. I did wonder how long she would last. Heat climbed Marisol's neck. She knelt among the broken glass, gathering shards with bare hands. And for one terrible moment, she was not in the ballroom at all. She was in a smaller room, years ago, holding a broken plate, while a man explained to his friends that his wife could turn breathing into an emergency. Then she noticed the child. A small girl stood in the doorway of the West Gallery, half hidden by the curtain, watching Marisol with enormous dark eyes. She could not have been more than 8. She did not smile, did not speak, and did not move. Behind her, through the door, she was not supposed to have opened, Marisol saw the shape of a piano beneath a gray cloth. Leave it? The voice came from across the room, low and unhurried, and every guest went still. Marisol looked up into the face of Leandro Falco. He crossed the floor without seeming to hurry, and people moved out of his path the way water moves around stone. He was the kind of man a room noticed by going quiet. She had seen him only twice in 9 days, both times from a distance, and both times she had expected the owner of such a house to arrive loudly. He did the opposite. He arrived like a held breath. He was not looking at the glass. He was looking at the open door behind her, and at the child framed in it, Vesna. His voice changed on the name, gentled by a single degree. You should be upstairs. The girl did not answer. Marisol understood, in the way one frightened creature recognizes another, that the child was not being defiant. She simply had no words to give. Somewhere a guest whispered that the girl had not spoken since the funeral. Poor thing. 3 years now. And the piano her mother left behind had not spoken either. Ravenna's voice rose, sweet and cruel. Perhaps the little maid could try the piano, since she enjoys making noise. A ripple of laughter. The professionals were too wise. Maybe clumsiness will succeed where talent refused. It was meant to wound. Marisol felt it land. But she was already looking past all of them. Past Falco, past the laughter, to the gray shape beneath the cloth and the silent child, who could not stop staring at it. And she heard herself think something she had not let herself think in a long time, that poor instrument. Someone shut it in the dark and called it broken. Marisol Thorne sat down the last piece of glass, rose to her feet, and walked toward the room no one was allowed to enter. Stop. Renzo, the man who never left Falco's shoulder, moved to intercept her. But Falco lifted 2 fingers, and Renzo went still. Marisol did not stop. She crossed the threshold into the cold gallery, and the noise of the party fell away behind her. She lifted the gray cloth from the piano, and folded it once, carefully, the way one uncovers something sleeping rather than something dead. The instrument underneath was beautiful and wounded. Dust had settled into the carving. One pedal hung at a broken angle. When she pressed a key near the middle, nothing came, only the soft thud of a hammer that no longer reached its string. Behind her, Falco had followed as far as the doorway. He did not enter the room. She noticed that. A man who owned everything, standing at the edge of one door as if the floor beyond it might give way. "It is not cursed," Marisol said quietly. She was not certain whom she was speaking to. "It is not even broken, not really. It has only been left alone so long, it forgot anyone was coming back." She touched a silent key. 3 notes have slipped. The felt has dried. The pedal was forced once, and never mended. Someone tried to make it perform before it was ready, and it refused. That is not the same as ruin. For a moment, no one spoke. "You reached that conclusion," Falco said, "from touching 4 keys. I had a good ear before I had anything else." Ravenna's laugh drifted in from the ballroom. No one joined it. Falco's gaze moved from Marisol to the child, who had crept to the piano bench and now stood with one hand resting on the wood, watching the maid as though she were the first safe thing to enter the house in years. Something crossed Falco's face and was gone. "The finest players in the country would not touch it," he said. Maybe they were listening for applause. Marisol met his eyes, and to her own astonishment, her hands were perfectly still. "I only want to hear what it still has left." Falco was quiet for a long moment. Snow ticked against the tall windows. Then he said one word, and it silenced the last of the laughter behind him. "Play." "Not here," Marisol said. "Not with all of them watching." Falco's brow rose a fraction. "You were offered a fortune to play in front of exactly these people. And that is why the others failed, even the ones who came." She surprised herself with the steadiness of it. You cannot coax a frightened thing back to life in front of a crowd waiting for it to fail. It can feel them. So can she. She glanced at the child. "If you want it to make a sound tonight, clear the room. No audience. No price. Only time." She expected refusal. Men like Leandro Falco did not empty their own ballrooms because a maid asked. He looked at her for the length of 3 heartbeats. Then he turned to the doorway. "Everyone out," Ravenna's smile faltered. "Leandro, surely you are not. The gallery is closed." He did not raise his voice. He never seemed to need to. "Renzo, see the guests to their cars." Within minutes, the noise drained from the house. The orchestra packed its instruments. Ravenna left in a swirl of silver and offense, and then the great room was empty, and there was only Marisol, a wounded piano, a silent child, and a man who stood carefully outside the door. Marisol rolled her sleeves to the elbow. She did not play. Not yet. She knelt and studied the broken pedal without touching it, the way she might study an injured hand before asking to hold it. She tightened nothing by force. She found the 3 dead keys and left them alone. She would not start with what was broken. "I am not going to fix all of it tonight," she said, mostly to the child now. "Some of it will take a long time. That is all right. We will go around what is not ready." Vesna climbed onto the far end of the bench. She did not make a sound, but she did not leave. Marisol laid her hands on the keys that still lived, in the register that had not been forced or silenced, and she began to play. Not a showpiece. Not the thundering thing the professionals would have chosen to prove themselves. She played something small and slow, 4 notes folding gently into 4 more, a lullaby with no name that she had once played to herself on nights she could not stop hearing Vaughn's voice. The old piano, missing 3 notes and 1 pedal, gave back what it had left. It was not perfect. It wavered. One string sounded a hair flat. But it was warm, and it was alive, and it filled the cold gallery like something exhaling after holding its breath for 3 years. Beside her, very softly, the child made a sound. It was not a word. It was barely anything, a small broken hum, the first note Vesna had offered the world since her mother died. But Marisol heard it, and her hands did not falter, and she did not turn to look, because she knew that turning to look was how you frightened a thing back into silence. In the doorway, Leandro Falco stood absolutely still, one hand pressed flat against the frame, as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. When the last note faded, no one moved. Then, from the threshold he had not crossed, Falco spoke, and his voice was not the voice the city feared. It was quieter than that, and far more dangerous to a woman who had promised herself she would never again let a powerful man matter. "Who taught you," he said, "to go around the wound?" The next morning Marisol woke certain she would be dismissed. She had emptied a room of 200 paying guests, contradicted the most feared man on the lake, and touched a piano that a dozen professionals had been too wise to approach. She dressed for work the way a person dresses for a sentencing. No dismissal came. Instead, when she carried her cleaning cart past the West Gallery at 7, she found the gray cloth folded neatly on a chair, and the door propped open. And she found the child. Vesna sat on the piano bench with her knees drawn up, exactly where Marisol had left her the night before, as though she had never gone to bed. When she saw Marisol, she did not smile. But her whole small body turned, the way a plant turns toward a window, and Marisol understood that she had been waiting. "You are not supposed to be down here alone," Marisol said gently. The girl said nothing. She patted the bench beside her. Marisol should have found the nanny. She should have reported the open door and gone back to her cart. Instead, she looked at the empty half of the bench and at the child who had made her first sound in 3 years to a stranger's lullaby, and she sat down. "All right," she said, "but I am working, so you will have to work with me." She did not play. She lifted the fallboard and looked inside, at the dried felt and the slack strings, and she talked to Vesna the way she talked to frightened things, about nothing that mattered. She said the felt was like a coat that had gone stiff in the cold. She said the flat string was only tired, not dead. She said the broken pedal would need a real repairman and a great deal of patience, and that patience was the part most people skipped. Vesna listened as though the words were instructions worth keeping. The next day, Marisol brought a soft cloth and a small pot of oil from the memory of the repair shop she had kept the way other people keep prayers, and she cleaned the dust from the carved music desk while Vesna watched, and she let the child hold the cloth and press it, once, to the wood. So that the first thing Vesna did to the piano her mother left behind was not to play it, which was frightening, but to care for it, which was not. The wood came up warm and dark beneath the grime. Vesna put her palm flat against it and left it there a long time. That was how it began. Over the next several days, wherever Marisol worked, the child appeared. When she polished the long table in the dining hall, Vesna sat beneath it. When she carried linens up the east stairs, she would turn and find the girl 3 steps behind, silent as a shadow. The staff did not know what to make of it. Agatha, the head housekeeper, a broad and kind woman who had run the house for 20 years, drew Marisol aside by the linen closet. "That child has not let a soul near her since her mother passed," Agatha said. "Not the doctors he brought from the city, not the specialists, not him." She lowered her voice. "You be careful, girl. What that man loves, he guards, and he loves the child more than his own breath." Marisol did not yet know how true that was or how much trouble it would bring her. The staff hall warmed to her by degrees, the way careful people warm to anyone. Emile, the youngest of the footmen, burned his wrist on a serving tray one evening, and it was Marisol who reached him first, who held the scald under cold water before he had finished swearing, who remembered that he could not take one of the salves in the cabinet, and found him another. She noticed, the way she noticed everything, that he had not eaten since morning, and she set bread in front of him without being asked. He told the others afterward that the new maid was strange, and then pressed on what he meant, that she was the only one in the house who ever seemed to be paying attention. In the evenings, when her shift ended, she began stopping at the West Gallery for a quarter of an hour. She tended the piano the way she had promised, going around the wound, never forcing the dead keys, coaxing the live ones. Vesna always came, and more often, so did he. Falco never entered the room. He stood in the doorway with his coat still on, a man who had spent the day among people who measured the price of every word, watching a maid and a silent child bend over a broken instrument. He did not speak, he did not order. He only watched, and something in his still face loosened by a degree each night. Then came the evening. It stopped being about the piano. It was late. Rain moved across the lake. Marisol had played the small, nameless lullaby again, low and slow, and Vesna had leaned into her side and closed her eyes. When the clock struck 9, Falco stepped to the threshold. Vesna. His voice was gentle, but it was still a command. The voice. Grown men obeyed without question. It is time for bed. Come. The child did not move. Vesna. Bites, ha. He said it again, and Marisol felt the girl's small hand close around a fold of her apron. Come. Vesna pressed her face into Marisol's sleeve and did not come. For a long moment, the most feared man on Lake Salora stood in his own doorway and was refused by a child who weighed less than the coat on his shoulders. Marisol saw something move through his face that she had no name for. It was not anger, it was closer to grief, and to wonder, and to a fear he would never have admitted aloud. She has never done that, he said quietly. Done what? Chosen. His eyes lifted to Marisol's. In 3 years, she has never once chosen to stay. Marisol lived at the far end of the staff wing, in a narrow room with a slanted ceiling and a window that looked over the kitchen garden. It held a bed, a chair, a small table, and a chest of drawers with one handle missing. On the sill sat a tin that had once held tea, and now held her folded wages. On the side of the tin, in her own hand, was a single word: keys. She loved the room with an intensity that would have embarrassed her to explain. For 12 years she had shared a home with a man who believed that a shared home meant he owned every corner of it. Vaughn had opened her letters. He had gone through her drawers while she slept, and called it devotion. Once, months after she left him, he had let himself into her rented flat with a key. She never knew he had copied, and carried off the small second-hand keyboard she had bought with her own saved money, because, he said, he had paid for the roof it stood beneath. This room had one key. It hung on a cord around her neck, and it belonged to no one but her. So when the knock came, soft, at 9:30, she opened the door only a hand's width. Leandro Falco stood in the narrow corridor, still in the clothes he had worn all day, looking faintly absurd beneath the low ceiling of the staff wing, a man built for tall rooms. The child is asleep, he said. Agata is with her. I did not thank you. You do not have to. No, he agreed. I do not. And still he did not leave. Marisol became aware of how small the room was behind her, and how easily a man like this could decide it belonged to him. She kept her hand on the door. Then he did something Vaughn had not done once in 12 years. May I come in? The question was so simple, and it undid something in her so completely, that for a moment she could not answer. No man of any size had ever stood at a door that was hers and waited to be let through it. For a moment, she said. He crossed the mat with a care that surprised her, and stood just inside the doorway. touching nothing. His gaze moved over the room, the chair with the mended seat, the tin on the sill, the single narrow bed. You could have better quarters, he said at last. The east rooms are larger, warmer. This one has a lock. That works, Marisol answered. I have learned to like a lock. That works. His eyes went to the tin, and to the word on its side, and she watched him decide not to ask, which cost him something, because he was plainly a man who asked. He looked instead at her worn shoes, at the split beginning along one sole, and she saw the exact moment he wanted to solve it, the way another man might reach for a fallen coin. Do not, she said. I have not said anything. You were about to buy me something. Your face was already writing the order. The corner of his mouth moved, the smallest fraction, and the first thing close to a smile she had seen him give anyone. It is a useful face, he said. Not in this room. He inclined his head, as a man might to an equal, and he went. And Marisol stood a long while, with her back against her own locked door, frightened, less of him than of how easy he had been to let in. Within a week it had become a routine, none of them named. Each evening after supper, Marisol went to the West Gallery. Vesna was always there first. Falco came when his work released him, sometimes at 8, sometimes long after, and one night, without ceremony, he stopped standing in the doorway, came inside, and sat in the chair by the window. No one remarked on it, because to remark on it might have ended it. He brought the piano a tuner, from the city, a nervous elderly man who wanted to work quickly and alone. Marisol would not allow it. Slowly she told him. And she stays. She nodded at the child. If you rush it, if you make it loud, she will decide the piano is a frightening thing. Again you will have mended every string and broken the only part that matters. The tuner looked to Falco, expecting to be rescued from the maid. Falco said, do as she asks. So the old instrument came back to life, the way a person recovers from a long illness a little at a time. One dead key woke, then another. The flat string was coaxed true. When the part for the broken pedal finally arrived, it was fitted without a single loud word spoken in the room, because Marisol had asked for quiet, and, absurdly, in the house of Leandro Falco, quiet was what she was given. He began to stay past the music. He learned, without admitting that he was learning anything, that she took her tea without sugar, that she grew quiet rather than loud when she was tired, that she hummed the same 4 notes under her breath when she believed no one could hear. Once he brought a chessboard, thinking to fill the silences, and she beat him twice, and then confessed she had learned the game from a book, because Vaughn had disliked losing to her, and so she had only ever played against the page. Falco put the chessboard away and did not bring it out again, because he understood, by then, that some of her skills were scars, and that she did not want them admired. Vesna began to leave things. Marisol found them, the way one finds evidence of a shy animal. A dried flower laid in the center of the bench. A drawing, in blunt pencil, of 3 figures and a great black shape that could only be the piano. A single boiled, sweet, unwrapped, and slightly linty, set with enormous care, on the corner of the cleaning cart. She kept every one of them. What she did not keep was anything Falco tried to give her. The first time it was an envelope of money, folded into her apron pocket while she was turned away, more than a month of wages. She left it on the hall table outside his study with a note that said only, I did not do it for that. The second time it was a coat, thick and gray and costly, waiting on the chair in her room in place of her worn one. She hung it outside his study, on a hanger. The third time, he only looked at her across the piano and said, You are the one person in my life who gives things back, and she said, Then perhaps you have been handing the wrong things to everyone else, and he did not try money again. What he could not seem to stop noticing was her hands. He saw that when the men from the city came, the ones with flat eyes who made even his own staff walk softly, Marisol dropped things, a spoon, a folded napkin, a whole stack of clean plates, Once, that burst across the floor, while one of them laughed too loudly behind her. Yet when she sat at the piano, or drew a splinter from Emile the footman's palm, or cleaned a scrape on Vesna's knee, her hands were as steady as still water. He said nothing of it. But Marisol caught him watching her, the way a man watches a lock he has not yet found the key to. And she knew that sooner or later, Leandro Falco was going to ask her a question she was not ready to answer. She was right about that. She was only wrong about when. The question came on a gray afternoon, 3 weeks later. Falco found her not at the piano, but in the small room off the pantry where the household ledgers were kept, standing at the shelf, with a stub of pencil and a look of quiet concentration. She did not hear him at first. 206 bath sheets, she was saying under her breath. To no one. 90 hand towels. 12 past mending. You count them from memory, Falco said. She turned quickly, and the pencil slipped from her fingers and rolled under the shelf, which told him she had not known he was there. She did not stoop for it. I wash them, she said. You learn a house through the things you wash. He came no closer. He had learned, in 3 weeks, that she was easier to speak with when he left her room to breathe. Agatha approves the accounts. Agatha runs 60 people. She cannot count every towel, and she should not have to. But the linen order has been wrong since spring. Someone is billing the house for 30 sheets a month that never arrive. She hesitated, then said the rest. The kitchen staff have been buying their own gloves out of their wages because the order was cut. 2 of them have hands that crack open in the cold. I wrote it in a notebook. I did not know who to trust with it. Then he crossed the small room and she let him, and he picked the pencil up from beneath the shelf and set it in her hand and looked at the notebook she had half hidden against her skirt. May I? She gave it to him. He turned the pages slowly. Quantities. Dates. Which suppliers shorted, which order, which of his staff had skin that split, which had a child at home, which had not eaten by midday when a delivery ran late. It was, he realized, a more honest account of his own household than anything his managers had ever handed him, and it had been kept by a woman he paid to be invisible. How long? He said. Since my 2nd day. The men I employ to know these things do not know these things. You have worked here 5 weeks. I notice when something is being quietly hurt, she said. It is the only thing I have ever been good at. And there it was. The opening he had been circling for 3 weeks, and he found he did not want to force it any more than she forced the dead keys. So he asked the smallest version of the question, Where did you learn the piano? For a long moment, he thought she would not answer. Then she set the notebook on the shelf and folded her hands, the way a person folds their hands to keep them from shaking. I was going to be a real one, she said, a pianist. When I was young, I had a teacher who said I heard things other people had to be taught to hear. There was a school. I was going to sit the examinations. She stopped. Then I married Vaughn. I was 19. He was older, and certain, and for a while certain felt like safe. Falco said nothing. He had learned that too. He did not forbid me at first. He only had opinions. My playing was noise when he was tired. It was showing off when there were guests. It was a childish thing to cling to when we needed me to be serious about our life. Her voice stayed very level, which was how he knew what it cost. He never once broke the piano. He was far too clever for that. He simply arranged things so that every time I sat down, I could feel him behind me, waiting to be disappointed. A pair of hands cannot play for a person who is waiting for them to fail. After a few years, they stopped being able to play at all. And you left. I left. 12 years too late, but I left. She almost smiled. I worked in a shop that repaired old pianos and violins. I could not afford to own one, but I could tune them and mend them, and I found I loved the broken ones best. Then I cleaned for a church that let me practice on its instrument at night, when the building was empty and there was no one to hear me be imperfect. She looked at the ledger shelf, rather than at him. That is where I learned to go around the wound. Not from a teacher, From being one. The room was silent. Somewhere down the corridor a clock counted. I want to offer you a position, Falco said at last. I have a position. I carry trays. A different one. Vesna's care. The instrument. Whatever music is left in this house. He chose the next words carefully. Paid, properly, and separate from the trays. 3 hours each afternoon that belonged to her and to the piano, and to no one else. She was quiet. He watched her want it, and distrust the wanting. In equal measure, I would need it in writing, she said. You do not trust me. I trust paper. Paper does not have a bad morning and change its mind. He might have been insulted. Instead, something in him eased, because it was the least frightened thing anyone had said to him in years. He led her to his study, a room of dark wood and lake light and maps she did not look at, and took a blank sheet from the drawer and set it before her. Then write it, he said. The terms. You write them, I sign them. She stared at the paper as though it might be a trick. You want me to write my own contract. You said you trust paper. So make paper you can trust. She sat, and slowly in a careful hand she wrote that the music work would be wholly separate from the housekeeping, that she could refuse any method she believed would harm the child or the instrument, and that no one, himself included, could overrule that refusal. That Vesna would never be made to speak, and never be made to perform, and that no doctor or specialist would be brought in to force either, that her hours were fixed, that either of them could end the arrangement, with 7 days between the saying and the leaving. Then at the bottom, she added one more line, and her pen slowed as she wrote it. That her private life would not be examined, followed, or interfered with, unless there was immediate cause to fear for someone's safety. She turned the page toward him. Falco read it twice. He read the last line a third time. You believe I would investigate you. You are Leandro Falco. Everyone I have met since I came here believes you already have. He did not deny it. He took the pen. But before he signed, he drew a small mark beside her final line, and beneath it wrote 4 words in a hand as sharp as a blade. Immediate cause. Defined by her. Marisol looked up. Why? Because if I am the one who decides what counts as danger, he said, then your line protects nothing. It only sounds as though it does. I have spent my life deciding what other people should fear. I would like once to have signed the right away. She looked at the paper and at the name on it, and did not know how to tell him that no one had ever handed her a pen and asked her to draw the shape of her own safety. So she said nothing. But that night she copied it a second time in her own hand, for herself, and folded it into the tin marked keys, beside the wages and the single cracked ivory key she had carried out of her old life, because some promises a person needs to be able to hold. She did not know that within a month a photograph would arrive that tested every word of it. The music came back into the house before the trouble did, with the piano mended and the contract signed. Vesna began to play. Not well, not yet, and not for anyone but Marisol. She would climb onto the bench in the afternoons and pick out the 4 notes of the nameless lullaby with one finger. And then, on some days, a 5th note of her own, and Marisol would answer it, and the 2 of them would build small wordless conversations. No one else was invited to hear. The child still did not speak, but she had begun to hum while she played, low and unconscious. And once, when she thought Marisol was not listening, she had sung a single wandering line under her breath, and Marisol had stood in the corridor, with her hand over her mouth so the child would not see her cry. It was Falco who decided the house should have music in earnest again, and Falco, who therefore invited Anselm Brandt. Brandt was a conductor of some fame in the city to lead a season of concerts, and he came to Vallacchiara because Falco was a patron of the children's music charity he fronted, and because rich men who fear one another are polite in exactly this way. He was perhaps 40, silver at the temples, warm in the manner of men who have never had to wonder whether a room was glad to see them. He was charming to Agata. He was gentle with Vesna, And when he heard Marisol play, quite by accident, through the open door of the West Gallery, he stopped in the corridor and did not move until she had finished. "Who you are," he said, "and why are you carrying towels?" She laughed before she could stop herself. It had been a long time since a stranger's attention had felt like anything but danger. Brandt was easy in a way, Falco was not. He asked her questions and wrote the answers down. He asked where she had studied, and did not flinch when she said, "A repair shop and an empty church." He told her the charity ran a program for children who had stopped speaking after loss, that music reached them where words could not, and that she had, plainly, already found this out on her own. He rested his hand on her arm, briefly, the way musicians touch one another, and asked whether she would consider coming to the city to see the work, and perhaps, if it suited her, to join it. "There is a whole field for what you do by instinct," he said. "You should not be hiding it in a linen closet." Marisol did not see Falco in the doorway. She felt the room change before she understood why. That particular stillness that arrived with him, and she turned to find him watching the place on her arm where Brandt's hand had rested, though the hand was gone. "Anselm," Falco said pleasantly. "I did not know the tour of the house included the staff." Brandt, who was not a fool, took his leave with grace. But he left a card on the piano lid, cream and expensive, with the name of his program and a line written on the back in a quick, slanting hand. For when the linen closet is not enough, Marisol looked at it for a long time. She did not throw it away, and she did not tell herself why. She only slid it beneath the score she was copying. Where a thing can be kept without yet being decided. When he had gone, the West Gallery was very quiet. "He asked you to the city," Falco said. "You were listening. He asked within 30 feet of an open door. That is not the same as listening. Did it trouble you?" Falco was silent a moment, and she watched him decide to be honest. Which, she was learning, was the rarest and most expensive thing he did. "Yes," he said. "I disliked the way he made you laugh. I disliked that he touched your arm, as though he had earned the right. I disliked that he offered you a door out of my house, and that for one moment you looked at it." He met her eyes. "That is not a feeling I am proud of. Jealousy is not love. I know the difference. My whole life has been spent among men who confuse the two. Then why tell me? Because it is honest, and I have very little honest to give. I would rather hand you the ugly true thing than a handsome false one." Her heart did something complicated. She turned back to the piano so he would not see it. That was the evening Vaughn's voice came back into her life. She found the message when she returned to her room. A voicemail, from a number she had blocked, and he had changed in order to reach around her. She had not heard his voice in 4 months. It still moved up her spine like cold water. "I hear you are cleaning for Leandro Falco now," it said, pleasant and slow, the way he was always most pleasant when he was cruelest. "Careful, Marisol. Men like that collect unusual things. A clumsy little maid, who amuses the dangerous man, is a diversion for a season, that you always did mistake being noticed for being wanted. I am only telling you because someone should. No one else will." She listened to it twice. Not because she believed it, because an old wound, once it has closed, still asks to be touched, only to be certain it is real. She was still holding the phone when the knock came. Falco stood in the corridor. He looked at her face, not at the phone, and whatever he saw there rearranged something in his own. "May I come in?" "Not tonight." He did not argue. He did not ask what was wrong. He only said, "Are you safe?" "Yes." "Then I will go." He paused. "Marisol, whose voice is it?" "The one still in the room with you." She should not have answered. But the honesty he kept spending on her had made her careless with her own. "My husband's," she said. "He says I ruin what I touch." Falco was quiet. Then from the threshold he had not crossed. When a voice you did not choose keeps speaking in a room that is yours, you are allowed to give it a different one. Borrow mine if you like, until you can hear your own again. Mine says you do not ruin rooms. You only change what people are willing to hear in them. He left before she could answer. That night, she played his sentence over in her head instead of Vaughn's, and for the first time in a long while, she slept. Spring came slowly to Lake Solora. The ice let go of the shallows, and in April, the estate hosted the thing Falco had been building toward a benefit concert in the Great Gallery for Brant's charity, the one that carried music to children who had gone quiet. Marisol spent 2 weeks on it. She counted chairs and arranged flowers, and more quietly prepared a small screened alcove off the main room where Vesna could sit and hear the music without being seen by 200 strangers, because no one else had thought to ask what a silent child might need at a concert, and Marisol always thought to ask. Ravenna Voss arrived in pale green, trailing photographers and a small dog under one arm. She had not forgiven Marisol for keeping her post after the night of the broken glass. She had forgiven her far less for becoming the person Leandro Falco visited every evening. She found Marisol by the flowers. "The famous piano maid," she said. "I hear the child follows you like a duckling. I hear you have a contract." Her smile was a lovely cutting thing. "You should enjoy it. Men like Leandro tire of novelties. A nervous little thing who mends broken pianos is charming, right up until the evening she drops something in front of someone who matters. And then he will remember what you are." It was Vaughn's voice, wearing a green dress. Marisol felt the old cold climb her hands, and a passing waiter, turning too fast, caught the edge of her flower table. A tall vase went over. It struck the marble and burst, water and white roses spilling across the floor, and 200 faces turned, exactly as they had on the night everything began. Ravenna laughed softly. "And there it is." Heat flooded Marisol's face. Her hands went to ice. For one terrible second, she was 19, again, and then 25, and then 30, standing in a dozen bright rooms, holding a dozen broken things, while a man explained to everyone present that she could not be trusted with anything that might break. She began, automatically, to say she was sorry, and then a small hand slipped into hers. Vesna had come out of the alcove. She had crossed the whole crowded room, past the strangers, past the noise she could not bear, and she stood pressed to Marisol's side, with her chin lifted, glaring at Ravenna Voss with the pure outrage of a child, and she did not let go. The trembling in Marisol's hands stopped. She knelt, slowly, and gathered the roses, and she was not ashamed. And when she rose, she did not lower her eyes. She looked at Ravenna and past her at the whole watching room. "I drop things," she said. Her voice shook once. She let it. "I have always dropped things when there are people standing behind me, waiting to be proven right about me. For most of my life, I believed that meant something was wrong with me." She looked down at the child holding her hand. "But when something living is frightened, when something is in pain and everyone else has given up and called it broken, my hands do not shake, not once. So, you may keep watching the glasses." She held Ravenna's gaze. "I will keep watching what actually matters." No one laughed. Into the silence. From the doorway, Leandro Falco said, "Leave it." And he was not speaking to Marisol. He was looking at Ravenna. "You have been waiting all evening for her to fall. It is not a becoming thing to wait for." Ravenna's face went white, then very controlled, and she withdrew into the crowd, and the concert went on. For the rest of the evening, something in the room had shifted. The guests who had turned to watch her fall now watched her differently, the way people watch someone who has refused a part that was written for them. A woman she had never met stopped her by the doors and asked, quietly, whether it was true that she had taught the silent child to make a sound. Marisol said only that she had taught her nothing. She had simply stopped, expecting the child to fail, and the child had done the rest. Later during the presentation, Brant stood and told the room about the children's program, and then, without warning her, he said that the estate had given the charity something rarer than money. It had given it a person. And he asked Marisol to say a few words about the work she did with a child who had not spoken in 3 years. She had not known he would do it. She looked, once, toward the back of the room, where Falco stood apart from everyone, giving her the whole width of the floor, so she spoke. About fear that gets mistaken for stubbornness. About going around the wound instead of through it. About how you cannot heal anything, a piano, or a person, or a child, by standing behind it and waiting for it to fail. She did not drop the microphone. She did not apologize once. When it was over, she found Falco in the quiet corridor outside the library away from the music. "You arranged that," she said. "No," Brant did. "I only agreed not to stop him. You could have warned me. You would have found a reason to refuse." She looked at him, this man the entire city walked softly around, who had emptied his ballroom, because she asked, who had signed away his own right to decide what she should fear, who had stood at the back of a room full of people who obeyed him and handed the floor to a maid. "You stood where I could see you," she said. "I thought you might want that. I did." And then, because courage had become a thing she was tired of dropping, she closed the distance between them and kissed him. His hands stayed at his sides, and she understood, with a rush of tenderness that frightened her, that he would not move them until he was told he could. "You can," she whispered, against his mouth. "You are allowed." One hand came to her waist, careful as a held breath. The other rose to her cheek, and he kissed her back the way he did everything he truly meant, quietly and completely, as though the moment were something the two of them were building rather than something either of them was taking. When they parted, his forehead rested against hers. "Brant will be disappointed," he murmured. She laughed. "You are still jealous." Violently. "I am managing it. Keep practicing. With you," he said. "It appears I will have to." Neither of them heard the phone buzzing in her pocket. Neither of them knew that on the far side of the lake, a man who traded in leverage had just been handed a photograph of the maid and the child and had begun to smile. For 3 weeks, Marisol let herself believe that happiness could arrive quietly and be allowed to stay. The crisis came on a night in May, when a storm rolled off the lake and took the power with it. She woke to darkness and a sound she had never heard in the house before, a child screaming. She was down the corridor before she was fully awake, her single candle guttering, and she found Vesna's door open, and Agatha already there, helpless, and the child, rigid in the corner of the room, with her hands clamped over her ears, making a raw, wordless sound of pure terror. The thunder had woken something in her that words could not reach. Falco arrived a moment later, soaked from crossing the courtyard, and he went to the child and used the voice that had ended arguments among armed men. "Vesna, look at me. You are safe." The child screamed louder. "Stop," Marisol said. He turned. "You are making the room louder," she said gently, "so it would not be a blow. She cannot tell your voice from the storm. Neither of them will stop because she is told to." She set down her candle. "Come with me. Both of you. Bring her to the piano." They carried her between them, down the dark stairs to the west gallery, where the great black shape of the instrument sat waiting. Lightning lit the tall windows and went out. Marisol sat on the floor beside the bench. Not on it, and she did not reach for the child. "Sit," she told Falco, "on the floor. Beside her, not touching." No one had ordered Leandro Falco to sit on a floor in 20 years. She watched the refusal move through him, the whole architecture of a man who had survived by being the tallest thing in every room. Then he lowered himself onto the cold boards beside his shaking niece, and she loved him for it before she had decided to. Marisol reached up in the dark and laid her hands on the keys that still lived. And she played the nameless lullaby, 4 notes folding into 4 more, slow as breathing. "Do not tell her to be calm," she murmured. "Show her. Slow your own breath. She is listening to your body, not your words. When you settle, she will believe there is nothing chasing any of you." Thunder broke over the lake. The child flinched. Marisol kept playing. Falco, beside her, slowed his breathing until it matched the tempo of the lullaby, and Marisol slowed hers to meet him. And between them, by degrees, the small, rigid body began to loosen. Vesna's hands came down from her ears. She crept on hands and knees in the dark, and put herself between the two of them, and pressed one palm flat to the side of the piano, as though she could feel it breathing. "Now," Marisol whispered. She took one of the child's hands and set it on a single live key, and pressed gently so that Vesna herself made the note. Falco, understanding, laid his hand over both of theirs, and the three of them together sounded one low, warm chord into the dark, and held it, and let it fade. The storm moved on across the lake. Vesna fell asleep on the floor between them, one hand still on the wood. For a long while neither of them spoke. "Who does this for you?" Falco asked at last, very quietly. "Does what?" "Sits beside you when the room becomes louder than the thing you are actually afraid of." She tried to find a joke. None came. "No one," she said, and the word was too honest to take back. "People mostly waited behind me to see what I would drop." His jaw tightened in the dark. Then they were watching the wrong moment. She looked at the sleeping child. "Vaughn used to stand behind me while I played," she said. "Not close. Just close enough. He never said stop. He only waited, every single time, for me to make a mistake, so that he could sigh." After a few years, my hands shook before they touched the keys. I stopped being able to play at all, and I told myself that if I left, I would be proving him right, that I was a person who ruined things and could not manage a life, so I stayed. 12 years. She almost laughed. "Do you know what I understand now? I was not failing to manage one life. I was managing two, his, and whatever was left of mine." Falco was silent a moment. Then he told her a thing he had told no one. "I found her mother in the same house I was born in," he said. "Myron, we had nothing. Our father was the kind of man Vaughn would recognize. When I was young and frightened and had not yet learned to make other people frightened instead, Myron used to play for me, an old, broken upright in a cold room. She was not good, at first, but she played until the room felt like somewhere a person could survive the night." He looked at the child. "Everyone I have met since my name became a thing to fear, met the name first. They calculate what I am worth to them before they say good evening. Myron never did, and that piano knew me before I was anyone, before there was anything to gain by loving me." He was quiet a moment, his hands still resting near the sleeping child. "She was the only person who ever told me I was more than the worst thing I had done. When she died, there was no one left who remembered the boy from the cold room. Only the men who remembered what he became." He looked up, at the shape of the piano, above them in the dark. "I kept the instrument because it was the last thing that still knew the difference. And I would not let it be touched by anyone who did not, so you sealed it away. I could not bear to hear it played by someone who was only playing it, only performing, and I could not bear to hear it silent." He shook his head slowly. "And then a maid I hired to be invisible, sat down at it and did not perform. She went around the wound, and the child, my sister, left me, made a sound, for the first time since the funeral." He turned to look at her in the dark. "What am I supposed to do with you?" "Nothing," she said softly. "That is the entire point. You are not supposed to do anything with me. You are only supposed to ask." He lifted her hand in the dark and pressed his mouth to her knuckles, and did not let go. Nothing more happened that night. It was enough. They did not know that while they slept, a plain envelope had been left at the eastern gate, and that inside it was a photograph and a single line of writing that would undo everything the morning was about to become. Renzo brought the envelope to Falco at dawn. Inside was a photograph of Marisol on the gallery steps, with Vesna's hand in hers, both of them caught in a square of morning light. Around Marisol's face, someone had drawn a careful red circle. On the back, in block letters, was written a single sentence: "Even a locked instrument can be used to make a man sing." Falco read it once. By the time the sun was fully up, he had put 4 more men on the eastern wall. By midday he had decided the staff wing was not safe. By the time Marisol came in from the town that afternoon, with thread to mend Vesna's torn coat, her belongings had been moved. She found them in a suite in the main house. Her clothes hung in a wardrobe of dark wood. Her books stood in ordered rows on shelves she had not chosen. Her tea tin, the one marked keys, sat on a marble surface beside an arrangement of hothouse flowers, as though someone had tried to rebuild her small life from memory and had gotten every proportion wrong. Vesna's things had been carried into the adjoining room. Falco stood by the tall windows, waiting. "What is this?" Marisol said. "You will both stay here until the threat is dealt with." He held out the photograph. "Someone has decided the two of you are the way to reach me. I will not give them the chance." Fear came first, cold and immediate, the red circle around her own face, and then, close behind it, something she had not expected: anger. "You moved my things," she said slowly. "Before you told me there was a photograph. There was no decision to make. There is always a decision. You simply made it without me, Marisol." His voice was patient. "You saw the picture. This is the safest room in the house. Vesna is next door. There are men on every for whom," she said. "It is the safest room for whom, because it is not mine. It has my things in it, arranged by someone else, behind a door I did not lock." She heard her own voice climbing, and did not stop it. "You watched me for 4 months. You watched me give that child a choice every single day. You watched me stop the instant she said no. You watched me wait at doorways instead of dragging anyone through them. You signed a piece of paper that said no one would overrule my refusals, yourself included." She was shaking now, but not the old shaking. "This was clean. And the first time you were afraid, you picked me up and moved me like a chair. You did not even ask." Something in his face closed. "I am trying to keep you alive." Vaughn used to say that too. Not those words, but that exact shape. "I am only doing this because I love you. I am only taking your keys because you frighten me when you drive upset. I am only reading your letters because I worry." Every controlling thing a man ever did to me, he did, while telling me it was for my safety. She met his eyes. "Do not mistake me. Your fear is real. The danger is real. But you answered a threat to my freedom by taking the last of it yourself. That is not the same." "That is what every single one of them believed," she said. "That their reason was different, that their fear was the urgent one, that their decision was the better one, and so my no did not need to be heard." The silence in the beautiful wrong room was enormous. He tried once more, and she watched him reach, in his fear, for the one lever he had sworn to himself he would never touch. "Vesna needs you," he said, and then she watched him hear himself. The regret that crossed his face was so immediate and so total that it almost undid her more than the words had. She looked at the child's door, at the small coat she had come home to mend, and the pain went through her chest like something with edges. "Do not," she said, and her voice broke on it. "Do not use her. I taught her that love would never be a leash. You watched me teach her that. Please do not make me prove the same thing to you." Falco closed his eyes. When he opened them, something in him had gone very quiet and very old. "You are right," he said. "I should not have said it. I will not say it again." She lifted a little key from around her neck. The key to the staff room she had loved, because the lock worked. The room he had moved her out of, without asking, and she set it on the marble beside the tin. "I am ending the contract," she said. "The contract said 7 days. The contract was for employment. My leaving is not employment, and a woman does not owe notice before she stops being moved around a house like furniture." He did not argue the point. She saw what it cost him not to. "Where you will go," he said. "That is no longer something you are permitted to decide." His hands closed at his sides. Every instinct in him, she could see it, every year of surviving by controlling the ground beneath his feet, strained against the single word she had left him. "I can protect you," he said, "not like this. Not by becoming the thing I already ran from once." "Then let me send Renzo one driver? No guards. He leaves the moment you are somewhere you have chosen." She almost refused it. But she saw that the offer of a single driver he would not follow, was him trying, clumsily, in the only language he had, to do the thing she had taught him, to hand her the choice instead of taking it. "One driver," she said. "And he leaves when I tell him." "One driver," Falco agreed, and the agreement looked as though it were made of broken glass. She packed only what was hers. She left the flowers, the ordered books, the wardrobe. She took the tin-marked keys and the folded copy of her own contract, and the small coat, which she would finish herself wherever she landed. At the door she stopped, because a small figure had appeared in the adjoining doorway, watching, silent again, her enormous eyes moving between the two adults who had taught her that a house could be a safe place. Marisol knelt. "I am not leaving because of you," she said very clearly. "So the child would keep it. You did nothing wrong. You never did. Do you understand me? Nothing." She pressed something into the small hand. The cracked ivory key, the one imperfect thing she had carried out of every room she had ever survived. "Keep this for me. It is not a goodbye. It is a promise that broken things can still be kept." Vesna's mouth opened. For one heartbeat, Marisol thought, prayed, that a word might come. None did. And Marisol Thorne walked out of the great house with everything she owned in a single bag, past the men on the wall, into a car with one driver, and did not let herself look back, because she had learned that looking back was how you frightened yourself into staying somewhere you had already chosen to leave. She took a room in Orsana, at the far end of the lake, above a clockmaker's shop, whose owner did not mind the sound of a keyboard through the floor at odd hours. It was small. A narrow bed, a hot plate, a window over an alley, and a lock that worked. It was hers. With the money in the tin, she bought a second-hand keyboard, not the piano she had dreamed of, but her own, chosen by her, carried up the stairs by her, plugged into her own wall. The first night she sat down to it she wept, and then she played anyway, badly and freely, with no one behind her waiting to sigh. She took work in the city, in the very program Anselm Brandt had described, with children who had gone silent after loss. She was, everyone quickly saw, remarkable at it. She did not make the children perform. She went around the wound. Brandt offered her a permanent place, and once gently dinner. She thanked him for the first, and declined the second, and he was kind enough not to ask why. Falco did not call. He sent one message, the morning after she left, and only one. "I watched you hand that child her choice every day, and the first time I was afraid I took yours. I told myself it was protection. It was not. Your belongings are yours, and no one will touch them. Your final wages are with Agatha. I will not contact you again unless you ask me to. The door of this house opens whichever way you decide." She read it every night for a week. She did not answer. Not because she did not want to, because she was learning, for the first time in her life, that she was allowed to take as long as she needed. At the estate, the piano went quiet. Again, Vesna stopped playing. She did not scream, and she did not fall ill. She simply folded back into her silence, like a flower closing, and she carried a small cracked piano key from room to room in her fist. And at night, Agata found her asleep on the floor of the West Gallery, as close to the instrument as she could get. Falco did not photograph the child. He did not send Marisol a message saying the girl was grieving. He knew, to the letter, that Vesna's grief was the one lever in the world. He had done that once. He would not do it again. Instead, he sat on the floor of the gallery, some nights beside his sister's daughter, the only two people left in the house who had loved the woman that piano remembered, and he spoke to the child as though she could answer. "I did what I always do," he said once into the dark. "I saw danger, and I took the choice out of the room. She told me exactly what mattered. I heard the words, and when I was afraid I forgot them anyway." The child leaned into his side. "I will not send for her. She has been fetched and moved and managed her whole life. If she comes back, it will be because she chose the road herself. Do you understand? We do not pull, not on the people we love." Vesna said nothing. But she opened her fist and looked at the cracked key. and closed it again. It happened 3 weeks after she left, on an evening in June, when the lights stayed long on the water. Marisol was in her small room above the clockmakers, marking a student's exercise, when she heard, below, the particular sound of a large car stopping in a small street. Her heart knew, before her mind did. It was not Falco. It was Agatha, climbing out of the car with her coat buttoned wrong, which Marisol had never once seen, and Renzo behind her. And then, held in Agatha's arms and reaching for the stairs before her feet had touched the ground, a small figure. Vesna. Marisol was down the stairs and into the street before she had decided to move. And the child, seeing her, tore free of Agatha and ran the last of the distance and threw both arms around Marisol's waist and held on as though she had crossed the whole lake by the strength of her own 2 hands. She would not settle, Agatha said, breathless, near tears. For 3 days she would not eat. She would not sleep. She carried that little key everywhere. And this morning she went to him. She took his hand. And Agatha stopped because she could not say it without weeping. She spoke, Renzo said quietly. Marisol went very still, her hands in the child's hair. 3 years, Agatha whispered. 3 years, and not a word. And this morning, she looked up at him and she said, the old woman pressed a hand to her mouth. She said, "Take me to Mary." Marisol sank to her knees on the pavement and gathered the child against her, and Vesna pressed her mouth to Marisol's ear, and in a voice, rusty and small and unbearably careful, the first voice she had used since the day the music stopped, she said it again, only for her. Mary. And Marisol Thorne, who had spent her whole life being told she broke what she touched, held the mended child, and understood that she had not broken anything. She had only ever gone around the wound. Headlights turned into the little street. Marisol lifted her head. A second car had stopped behind the first, and Leandro Falco stepped out of it into the June evening, and stood on the far side of the pavement, and did not come closer. He looked at the child in Marisol's arms first, confirming, the way he confirmed everything, that she was safe. Then he looked at Marisol. I did not send her, he said. I need you to know that first. I did not use her, she asked. She said your name, and she asked, and I could not. His voice, the voice the city feared, was not steady. I could not tell her no. Not that, not the first thing she had wanted to say in 3 years. I know, Marisol said. And she found that she did. He came no closer. He stood on the far edge of the light, this man who owned the ground under half the city, and he kept the width of the street between them because it was the only thing left that he could give her, which was not a demand. I have been standing outside doors for 3 weeks, he said. It turns out I do not know how. My whole life I walked straight through them. I decided what was on the other side, and I removed whatever I did not like. And you taught a broken instrument to sound again by refusing to force a single key. You taught that child she could say no to the whole world and still be loved. And I watched you do it every day, and I still could not stop myself from picking you up and moving you the moment I was afraid. He looked down. I understand it now. Safety a person did not choose is only a prettier cage. You told me that. Without the words, I heard the words. It took losing you to change the thing underneath them. Marisol rose, the child still holding her hand. Why did you come, then? She said. If not to fetch me? To ask, he said. Only to ask whatever the answer is. And then, from the far side of the pavement, powerful enough to own the street and careful enough not to step onto her half of it, he said the words that had become the shape of everything between them. May I come in? Marisol looked at him a long moment, at the man learning, too late and yet not too late, to wait at the edge of a door, at the child, between them, who had crossed a lake, and 3 years of silence to say a single name. And the fear that had lived under her ribs for most of her life stirred, and she waited for it, and found that it felt different. Now it did not feel like losing control. It felt like using it. You can come in, she said. He crossed the street the way she had taught the child to cross a room, slowly, letting her see the whole of it. And in the small room above the clockmaker's shop, with the second-hand keyboard against the wall and the tin-marked keys on the sill, and a child asleep between them before the hour was out, much later, when the room was quiet, he told her. Not as a claim, the way other men had told her things, but plainly the way he did everything he meant. The piano knew me before I was anyone, he said. That child chose you before I understood why. And I have spent my whole life being loved for what I could do to people, or for them. You are the first person who looked at the man before the name, and stayed anyway. He was quiet a moment. I love you. I loved you most, and understood it least, on the night I tried to cage you. Losing you was the only thing that ever taught me the shape of my own hands. Marisol did not answer at once. She had promised herself, long ago, never again to hand those 3 words to a man who might use them as a key to a lock. But this was a man who had spent a season learning to wait outside doors. I love you too, she said. And I am not going to be easy. I break things. I count towels in my sleep. I will send back every gift you buy me, unless you can prove it is for the child. I know, he said. I have never once wanted a life I could predict. They sat a long while in the small room, the child breathing evenly between them, the lake going dark in the window. He did not reach for her. She noticed that, the way she noticed everything, that even now, with the word love spoken between them, he waited, so she reached for him instead. She took his hand and set it against her cheek, the way she had once guided a frightened child toward a living key, and she felt the careful stillness in him give way, at last, to something that was not afraid. Below them, the clockmaker's shop chimed the hour, a small imperfect sound, a beat behind the true time. Neither of them moved to correct it. She did not go back as a maid. 3 months later she signed a lease, in her own name, on a house at the edge of Orsana, with a room large enough for a real piano, which she bought herself, with her own savings, and a small loan from Falco that carried so many clauses protecting her right to repay it and walk away that he called it, sourly, an insult, and signed anyway. She opened a practice, and called it Quiet Keys. She worked with the children Brant sent her, the ones who had gone silent, and with grown players whose hands shook because somewhere behind them once, someone had waited for them to fail. Her first pupil was a boy who had not touched a keyboard since his mother died. Her second was a celebrated concert pianist, terrified, who could no longer play a single note in front of another human being. Her third was an old woman who could pay only in jars of quince, and Marisol took the quince and taught her anyway. Vesna spoke, after that first day, the way the piano had come back, a little at a time, going around the wound. Some days many words, some days none. No one made her. She became, in time, Marisol's shadow at the practice, sitting quietly beside frightened children, living proof that a person could be silent for years and still have a whole voice waiting inside them. Ravenna Voss came once more at a benefit, and called Marisol the maid who had stolen Leandro Falco's grief and his child both. Vesna, older now and unafraid, crossed the room and took Marisol's hand and stared at the woman until she looked away. Marisol only smiled and held out a card. If your child, or your own 2 hands, ever forget how to be calm, she said, my rates are on the back. Ravenna did not take the card. Vesna stared until she did. Falco divided his time between the city and the lake. He still led men who feared disappointing him. He still made decisions Marisol did not ask about and would not have wanted to. But at the house, at the edge of Orsana, he knocked. He asked before he changed a thing. When he forgot, which he did, because a man does not unlearn 40 years in a season, Marisol reminded him, and Vesna would leave his side and go to stand by Marisol, which Falco declared, every time, to be a betrayal and which every time made him ask again. Once that summer, Marisol asked him about his sister, and he told her haltingly the small human things that Mirren had laughed too loudly in quiet rooms, that she had been a worse cook than anyone he had ever known, that she had wanted more than anything for the child to grow up somewhere that did not go silent when he walked in. Marisol listened and did not fill the pauses, and afterward she wrote a short, simple piece and taught it to Vesna, and did not tell the child whose it was for. She only called it, in her own copied score, Myron's, and left it where the girl would find it when she was ready. On the first cold evening of autumn, Marisol sat at her own piano with the window open to the lake. Vesna, besides her, picking out a melody with 2 hands now, and no missing notes between them. Falco stood in the doorway of the music room, in his shirt sleeves, watching the two of them the way he had once watched from the threshold of a sealed gallery, as though the floor beyond it were the only ground he had ever wanted to stand on. "You are welcome to come in," Marisol said, without turning around. "You do not have to wait there." "I know," he said, and he did not move, and she understood that he was not waiting to be let in any longer. He was choosing to stand at the door, because he had learned that a door you are allowed to cross is worth more than a whole house you have taken. Then he came in, and sat, and listened. The tin that had once been marked keys held wildflowers now on the sill, in the last of the light. He had sealed a piano away for 3 years because he could not bear to hear it played by someone who was only performing. It had taken a woman who refused to perform, who went around the wound, who handed a frightened child her own choice, and a cracked key, and a promise that broken things could still be kept, to teach him the difference between a thing you own and a thing that chooses you. She had come around the wound and stayed. And Leandro Falco, who could command almost anything, had learned the one thing he could never command, and would never again try to. He waited at the door until he was asked. And then, always, he came in. If this story stayed with you, do one small thing before you go. Somewhere in your life, there is a person, or an instrument, or a pair of your own 2 hands that someone once called broken and shut away in the dark. Do not force it. Go around the wound. And if these are the stories you want more of, stay close to this channel, because there is always another door here, and it only ever opens the way you choose. Subscribe, and come back tomorrow. We will be waiting, quietly, with the next one.